Hi friends, welcome to Share, Invite, Proclaim channel. I've had a request from a viewer to explain the Electoral College, so I'll attempt to do so in the most simplest way that I know how, because a lot of people don't understand it, and frankly, a lot of people say, well, let's just get rid of it. It's old system, it's not good for anything, let's just get rid of it. And this only happens whenever, like in the 2016 election, when you had a candidate who had the most popular votes did not win, because that candidate did not get the highest number of electoral votes needed. So I do want to try to explain the Electoral College, because it's an indirect system to vote for the president. One good way, I think, to describe it is to show a visual. See if I can get it from making too much changes. So let's pretend that I'm a voter, and I will vote November 3rd. And at the end of the day, all of the votes from the voters will be tallied, and at the end of the day, you'll find out who voted Republican, who voted Democrat. Well, this is just a simple illustration of what happens. When the popular votes in the state are counted, the candidate with the most votes, let's suppose, was the Republican candidate. And in my state of Indiana, we have 11 electoral votes. And so if the majority of the people in the state of Indiana vote for the Republican candidate, then that Republican candidate gets all 11 electoral votes. No matter what state you're in, that same process works. And you have to have a total of, you have to have a total of 270 electoral votes to win. There's a total of 538 electoral votes in our country. 435 are the representatives, 100 represent the senators, and then 3 electoral votes from Washington, D.C. And that's how it's set up. Now, you might wonder, well, why is this Electoral College important? And I think I can show it maybe easier by this visual. If you take the United States, a map of the United States, you can see that California, because it is a larger state, has more population, has 55 electoral votes. Texas, the next highest numbers, 38, and Florida and New York both have 28 electoral votes. And again, that's based on their population, and it's based on their 2 senators from each state. And so a president cannot get elected by just these large states alone. If you add up California's 55 and Texas 38 and Florida and New York there 29, you only get 151 electoral votes. That's what this number over here is. And so it forces the candidates to decide, where in this part of the country they need some of those electoral votes. And this is one of the reasons why we need the Electoral College, is that it forces the the Republican and the Democratic parties to pay attention to these internal states, that their needs are represented in the platforms of those political parties. And so it allows protection for the small states, that they're just not completely ignored by the federal government. So this system does help in that situation. There are several other reasons why the Electoral College is important, and why we have it, and it's the benefit of it. In that, well, the first one is to help protect the small states from being overlooked and underrepresented by government policy. But secondly, when our country was first founded, we had a system called the Articles of Confederation. So our former government was a confederation, and that was not working. You had states vying for this or that or the other, and they were sometimes in conflict with one another. And so the Founding Fathers realized that they needed a strong central government as well. And so they changed it from a confederation to a republic. And this system of the Electoral College, this indirect system, was set up for several reasons. And the first one I mentioned is that it protected the smaller states. Another reason they set up this system is that they were afraid of mob rule. They had just gone through a revolution, Shays' Rebellion, and they were fearful that mobs could overthrow the government and set up their own government, their own system. And so this federal government, this indirect system, would stop the dangers of a mob taking over the country. Now, the number of representatives that a state has is based on the census. The census is taken every 10 years, and then in the next 10 years, that tells you how many electors, or how many representatives, and how many electors then that you would have. Now, I always wondered, how did they decide the electors? Well, they might have one elector for every 500,000 people. That's just for an example. So you take the total population of the state, and then you have like one elector for ever so many people in your state, and that's how these electoral numbers happen. And so, at the end of the census year, when they take the census, for example, they're taking the census now for 2020. If there's any change in population, if the population shifts in any way, then your representatives or your electors can change in the next election. Now, some people say, well, it's an old system, and every time we have a situation where a person does not get elected, even though they have the highest number of electoral votes, like Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump had the highest number of electoral votes, was elected president, they always begin to clamor for revision or get away, or just do away with this and go with a popular vote. Well, in our 200 plus years of existence, there's only been 5 times in which the candidate with the highest number of popular votes did not win. And I would say that 2 of them are, in my mind, legitimate. The other 3 are circumstantial, or were in kind of an unusual situation. The 2 that I think were actually good legitimate examples was this latest one of 2016, where Trump received a majority of electoral votes, but not the number of popular votes, but he was elected. And then also in 1888, Benjamin Harrison had a higher number of electoral votes than Grover Cleveland, and so Harrison was elected president. The other 3 times, they were situational, and let me give you an example. In the election of 2000, Bush versus Gore, you had a situation in which whichever candidate won Florida, that candidate would win, because that the 29 electoral votes would put the other person over the 270 required votes needed. And so the state of Florida felt like that they needed to recount the votes. And so they went past the time that the state law accounted for any recounting of the votes. So both Bush and Gore sued, and the case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that because the recounting went past the lawful date, that the recounting had to stop, and then that meant that because Bush was ahead at the time, Bush received the 29 electoral votes from Florida and won the election. I think that's situational. Another time was in 1876, where Hayes versus Tilden. And this was so unusual in that two sets of ballots were sent to Congress, Republican ballots and Democratic ballots. And there was a tug of war. And so a compromise was made. The Democratic Party side decided that they would make a compromise. They would allow the Republican votes to be counted and not the Democratic votes if the Republicans would end Reconstruction in the South. It was that important to the Democrats. And so the compromise was made, and Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president. That's kind of an unusual situation. And even more unusual than that is the 1824 election, in which we had 4 candidates. And no one candidate had a majority of votes, obviously. And so you had John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson. And so after voting and no clear winner, Crawford had a heart attack, so he dropped out. And Henry Clay decided to support John Quincy Adams and shifted his votes to him, and that allowed John Quincy Adams to beat Andrew Jackson in 1824. So that's kind of a situational thing. So, the Electoral College has been changed several times, several different amendments to the Constitution. I know that when I first could vote for the president, I was 21. Well, the voting age is now down to 18, and that was because they felt that many people felt that if a person could go to war and perhaps lose their life, they should be able to vote, and that certainly was a good change. And so there's been a few changes as needed. And so in my view, the system is not broken. It still is pretty good for the length of time that we have had our country in existence. Many people say that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think I said that right. Anyway, the Electoral College should stay.